Where would you say your entrepreneurship journey started?
It definitely started when I was a kid. When I was 12 years old, so I wanted to wear different clothes then. And I asked my parents, and they're like, well, if you go make some money, you can go buy those clothes for yourself.
What happened with that journey? You said it failed miserably.
I went from like a $250,000 residual to basically no money, like overnight. And then the other problem is that I started that business with a business partner who had the exact same skill set as me.
You decide to shut it down, take a sales job. What happens after that?
The other thing that I realized is that services businesses don't scale. I had a ton of credit card debt. I was really, really broke. I had a mortgage to pay. So dollars I had, and at one point I had $38.09. I just didn't look at there as being another option. I just believed that I was going to find a way or make one.
What is the general problem you're trying to solve here?
Sold a couple of customers software that didn't exist yet. I think they call that vaporware.
What's one question you have for the next guest, whoever it is? Hey guys, welcome to Funds and Founders, the Untold Journeys, where we interview local Austin founders and talk about their journey of entrepreneurship and how they got to building what they're building. Today we have on Brandon, who has a background in finance. He has done a couple sales roles. He co-founded a marketing agency, co-founded an HR tech company called New Collar, and currently is the co-founder and CEO of a company called Job Machine. Welcome to the show, Brandon. Why don't you give the audience a quick intro and then we'll go deeper into it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Avi, and thanks for having me on the show. So my background is I'm a military kid. My dad was in the Air Force for 20 years, and I've lived in 8 different states before I turned 18. And then went to a small liberal arts school in Western Pennsylvania. Went from there to waiting tables and living in my parents' basement for almost a year while I looked for jobs I was underqualified for. And eventually got an entry-level job in finance in Pittsburgh. Did that for 2 years and moved up to the back office, middle office on a trading desk for a financial services company. Realized that I didn't want to be a futures trader, and I decided to get a job in tech. So I moved to Austin 9 years and change ago.
Nice.
And worked in tech sales for a few years. I sold at two different software companies. The one was selling to small businesses. The other was selling enterprise software. And then started like a sales and marketing agency, as you mentioned. That failed quickly, and then got another job building out the robotics division or I should say the oil and gas division of a robotics startup called Gecko Robotics. Did that for 3.5 years. While I was there, I started working on a business on the side, and ended up quitting and going full time to work on the same industry idea, different business called Job Machine. And that's what I've been doing for almost 2 years now.
Nice. So, where would you say your entrepreneurship journey started? Would it be the marketing agency? Would it be sometime sooner? Did you do something when you were a kid? Or where would you say that journey started for you?
Yeah, it definitely started when I was a kid. When I was 12 years old, my family moved from Montana to Northern Virginia. And we moved to a new place, and I'm not sure if you ever lived in Montana before.
No, never, no.
Montana's an interesting place. I loved it there. It's really pretty. We were living in a town called Great Falls, which is pretty close to Glacier National Park.
Got it, nice.
And
that's on my bucket list of places to go.
It's beautiful. I love it up there so much. And one of my favorite parts about moving so much growing up is that you got to see how different people from different parts of the country have different values, and none of them are right
100%.
or wrong. And different values cause people to function very differently. So whereas in the middle of Montana, people are very much about, we're all friends, we're doing stuff in the outdoors. People are pretty simple, not simple-minded. They just care about very different things than people that live right outside of Washington, D.C., where it's a lot more about who you know, status, what school you're going to. Like when you're a kid, these are the types of things that people talk about, and the types of clothes that you wear. And being one of 6 kids, my parents didn't spend a lot of money on clothes for their children, especially since my dad was in the military. So I wanted to wear different clothes than the ones I was getting from my second cousin Chris, who was much bigger than me. And I asked my parents to take me shopping, and they're like, well, you already have clothes. I was like, they don't fit me, and I want to be cool. And they're like, well, if you go make some money, you can go buy those clothes for yourself. And this is when I think I just turned 13 when I had that conversation. I was like,
nice.
Okay. how do I do that? So with a little bit of help from my parents, I figured out how to use like Microsoft Publisher to make flyers, and I dropped them off all over my neighborhood and started a lawn mowing business.
Nice. What was that first online business?
Lawn mowing.
Oh, lawn mowing.
Not
Okay,
online.
okay,
It was,
lawn mowing
I was mowing
business.
lawns, dude. I was
Nice,
doing
nice.
manual labor.
Nice. Okay, pretty cool. How did that first endeavor turn out? Were you mowing a lot of lawns or?
Oh yeah, we got a bunch of customers, and we held them for a couple of years. Me and my brother did, and it bought me clothes. It bought me my first computer that I bought for myself.
Nice.
It opened up a lot of doors.
Nice. What's one key thing you learned from that journey?
It taught me about sales and marketing. I
Nice.
mean, I think that was the most important thing. I think at the time I just assumed that it was kind of a given, but it kind of got my first dopamine hit for, man, you just go and like knock on a bunch of people's doors and ask for business. Eventually, some people will say yes to you, and it created a lot of freedom in my life at a time when I think a lot of people that I knew at the time had freedom with money because their parents gave them a lot of money.
Yeah.
That was pretty common where I grew up, at least in the circles that I was in, and for me, I associated that with working hard and going out and selling. So I think that kind of started me off for later in my career.
100%. Just random sidebar. Every time someone talks about business ideas, non-software businesses, in my mind, I'm like, okay, what was the CAC? What was the LTV? What was it take to acquire customers? But sometimes businesses are just pure, just hustle, go get the customer, go find where they live, and go sell them what they want. And you don't have to worry about these fancy terms and fancy things. But I was just thinking about that when lawn mowing it doesn't have to be complicated. You just have to go solve a problem.
Well, I mean, there's not that much difference from a lawn mowing business and any other services business.
100%.
I mean, it's the same thing, right? You go, you get a customer, and you're going to keep them for maybe just that one season while the grass is growing, maybe multiple seasons. And if you're going to scale that, then you'd have to hire other people to do the work for you, and you have to make sure that your margin after going and paying whatever it took to market the customers, because you're not going to go and knock on all the doors yourselves forever. You may pay to run ads, or you may do that, and you can do that, either like using paper ads, or you could do stuff on Facebook these days. But
100%.
they're all the same thing. The other problem with services businesses is that they're a lot more difficult to scale than software, which is the
100%.
lesson I learned the hard way about 6 years ago.
100%. Let's move forward. After your sales stint, you started a marketing agency. Why did you decide to start a marketing agency? How did that come about?
Well, it was really a sales agency, but I mean, in consumer products, they call it a marketing agency. But that was because I knew how to sell. That was my skill at the time. I'd spent about 4 years at that point selling software, and I had sold computers retail at Best Buy when I was growing up, and I waited tables for a few years, and I had been successful at both of the software companies that I worked at, well, all the sales jobs that I did. And I wanted to start a business. I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I had really big financial goals for myself, and I had really big leverage on what that money was going to mean to me in my life and my family's life in the future. I think that when it comes to working towards big goals, and you'll probably touch on this later, but it's important to have a lot of leverage. I knew what my leverage was, so even though I was doing, at the time, what I considered to be doing really well at the sales job that I was at, I knew that I needed to start a business. I didn't know what kind of business, and I was at a point where I was like, I don't really know what to do, and I think that the right decision is just to take action and go do something. One of my really close friends at the time, his dad had a lifetime career in consumer products, and I knew nothing about selling consumer products. Consumer products being it could be like a Coke can, like Coca-Cola is consumer product.
CPG goods,
Yeah, CPG goods. So if you buy it your local grocery store, at a bar or anything like that.
Yeah.
And he knew about how to do it, so I started. I went to a trade show and started talking to people about and asking which of them needed help selling their stuff. I started to get customers, and I got our first customer, and about 45 days later, I quit my job.
Nice. What happened with that journey? You said it failed miserably. Why did you end up shutting that down?
The reasons I ended up shutting it down were, basically what we did is we got two customers. The one customer was selling CBD oil, back in the very early days where not everyone knew what CBD was. This is late 2017.
Yeah.
And then the other customer was selling organic kombucha, but it was like a special kind of kombucha, and they came in both non-alcoholic and alcoholic variety. So I didn't do a great job selling the CBD oil, but I did a really good job selling the kombucha one.
Yeah.
Got them distribution, like I think 3 or 4 different states in like 90 days, and got them into every Whole Foods in Texas and every Total Wine in Texas. Got a lot of wins for them. And the deal was set up, the commission deal for it was going to set up like $250,000 plus residual income for at least the next, I think, 3 years. And I knew the VP of sales of that company, and I didn't get it there's things that I could have done with the legal paperwork, the contract, to make it like a little more secure, and I didn't do that. And after I closed all the business, one of the owners of the business said, "This is a crazy deal. We should have never done this," and just tore up the contract. So I went from like a $250,000 residual to basically no money, like overnight. And then the other problem is that I started that business with like a business partner who had the exact same skill set as me. So I started with another salesperson, which I think a lot of founders do when they start a business for the first time, is they go, "Oh, well, I need to go find someone who's like me, and we'll do this together." And I can't speak for everyone. I know that for me, that originated from a place of fear of not being able to figure out on my own, and I wanted someone to do it with. But ultimately, the guy I was working with, I mean, really, really sharp guy, incredible salesperson, and he also had a very different like risk appetite than I did. Like, I quit my job, went full time. He never went full time, and he hardly did anything. And he was a 50% owner of the business. So it created a bunch of issues. It just was clear that he wasn't involved, and it was, in order to move forward, I was going to have to either like just end it and then like start a new one, so that I owned the whole thing, because he wasn't doing anything.
100%, yeah.
And the other thing that I realized is that services businesses don't scale. I realized that for me and the financial goals that I had, starting a services business was not the most effective way to do that. You can go from 0 to 1 and start making money faster because you have a service, tangible, that you can do and provide to people, and they'll pay you for it quickly if you're any good at it. Yeah. And that was evidence, because even if I would have gone and kept doing it, I could have found other customers and took the skills I learned selling CPG and succeeded really quickly. I think a lot of software salespeople who are really good, like right now with all the VC money running out because interest rates are up, I think a lot of those people could go work in like a field like CPG or anything but tech with the skills they learned in tech and make a ton of money.
100%.
Because I was doing things that the CPG salespeople that were working around me didn't think was possible. They're like, "How did you do that?" I'm like, "I'm just doing what we do every day at like a tech sales organization." But so anyways, I realized that like, okay, in order to build a business with the type of financial outcome that I want, I need to build a software company. And I tried to build a software company without any engineers or product people. And, I realized that I'd gone about it the wrong way. At this point, I had a ton of credit card debt. I was really, really broke. I had a mortgage to pay. So I decided to go get a job and pay off my debt, build a war chest, and go meet people that had different skills than me.
Makes sense.
And do it again.
I feel like you talk about having a lot of maturity at this point.
I don't talk about having maturity at this point.
No. So like the way you talk, because you say you have financial goals, you realize the position you're in, you identify that there is some co-founder mismatch, and that you're in a spot that, is not making sense, is not aligning, right? So you have a futuristic vision, you have this place you want to be. When do you think you set up those goals? How did you come about those goals? How do you know that's where you want to be? Because I talk to a lot of early stage founders, younger founders, and they don't have these goals set. They don't know how to set goals. How did you come to that realization? How do you know, hey, I want to do this, so this is not the right path? Because that helps in decision making. But how do you get to that point in the first place?
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
That's what I meant when I said maturity.
Well, thank you. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I appreciate that. So for me, it started off when I had graduated from college. I was really excited when I went to college to go, get away from my parents and, kind of have some space. And I ended up having an amazing time in college. I did okay in school. I did great with friends and social stuff. I had a real fun time. And I wasn't really very focused on career or mission stuff. I was just focused on having fun and making great friendships while I was in school. And after I graduated, I paid the price for that. And I waited tables and lived in my parents' basement for almost a year. And towards the end of college, I decided that I wanted to become a futures trader. So I wanted to go basically gamble on like soybeans and currency futures and stuff in Chicago. And what I didn't realize is that, well, two things. A, in order to go do that right out of college, you probably should be, at least back in 2011 when I graduated, you should be a double major in econ and computer science from an Ivy League school and have good grades. I had none of those things. I didn't go to Ivy League school, and I definitely didn't have good grades. And the other thing that I didn't realize is that you can do that anyways if you're willing to go work an entry-level job in finance and go pay your dues. And I didn't know that was the case. It's not like there was a lot of ready information out there about that. And so I just applied to lots of jobs that I was massively underqualified for, and I made no progress. So I ended up going home and I basically waited tables, and I was training like Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of stuff, working out on the side because I was really interested in, and that was just a skill that I'd always wanted to learn. So I was doing that, and I felt kind of stuck. And I ended up meeting someone along the way, this guy who was a consultant at Deloitte, but had a really interesting background. He had been going to UVA, and he wanted to go into investment banking. And he had the wrong major for it, and he had a really difficult time getting in, but he ended up networking his way into it just by making like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of connections, phone calls, reaching out cold. And he ended up becoming a banker, didn't like it, went to go work as like an aide in Congress, and made a bunch of connections, got into consulting, ended up building his own government contracting business. The guy's like very, very wealthy now. Every time I see him on Instagram, he's flying around in jets and stuff. So he's doing just fine. But at the time, he was still a consultant at Deloitte. And one of his things then and still now is he helps lots of people, just kind of mentors them and helps them along their way. 100%. So I met him and he offered, hey, if you need help, he asked me what I was doing. I told him I want to be a futures trader. He goes, well, I think you could totally do that. I've only spoken with you for a few minutes, but you seem like you have the right personality for it. You seem like, I think you'd be really good at that. I was like, someone thinks I'd be good at this? Most people don't even know what I'm talking about. And he was like, yeah, we should meet for coffee sometime if you want my information. Let's meet up. And I ended up meeting with him, and he gave me a bunch of great advice, started pointing me in the right direction. And he also, because I still like to do, especially at that age, I would always ask people after I met with them if I thought that they were, smart, they were taking their time to reach out to me. I asked them, hey, what are like 2 or 3 books that you recommend that I read? And I asked him, what are 2 or 3 books that you recommend I read about futures trading? He's like, listen, man, I'm not a futures trader. I'm going to do my best to connect you with some people who may be able to give you some information about that. They're the ones to ask about futures books. And a book that made a big difference for me is this book by Napoleon Hill called Think and Grow Rich. He actually recommended the precursor to that, which is a little longer, a little more hippy-dippy, but it's called The Law of Success in 16 Lessons. It's basically a longer Think and Grow Rich. And I was like, okay, I'm reading the book. So I read the book and I took everything to heart. I took notes on everything. I underlined stuff. I did everything the book said. One of the things it has you do is it has you outline what's called your definite chief aim. And I forget all the details of how it got this out of me, but it basically has you write down all the things that you want out of life, in all the things you're willing to give up in order to get there. And for me, I don't know where I pulled this number from, but I wanted to be worth, I think it was $30 million by the time I was 28.
Got it.
And I wrote that down on paper, and one of the things he has you do is he has you write it down on paper and read it like 5 or 50 times or something every morning and every night out loud, which is exactly what I did. So I started reading that, and I had like that. I had a whole bunch of affirmations and stuff that I wrote down, a bunch of other goals. And that didn't happen. I was not worth $30 million when I was 28, and it really it rewired my nervous system to where that's something that I was really focused on. And over the course of my career, anytime I'd get into position, I was always focused on acquiring skills that I knew were going to help me get to the next level. And I was also really focused on making sure that once I learned those skills, I was focused on the next step and the next step and the next step. And anytime that I'd learn a skill and I started to get really good at a job, I would go, okay, well, I'm good at this job. I'm not really learning anything anymore. And I may be comfortable right now, but like if I don't keep moving, this isn't going to get me to where I want to be. So then I just move along to the next thing. So yeah, I think it's super, super important to understand what your North Star is and make sure that you cut off all other like options that aren't going to get you there. And $30 million or $300 million, whatever someone's goal is, that's not right for everyone. I just know that for me, that is what I cared about. It was like something deep down within me. For me, it had a lot to do with the types of properties that I wanted to own and the experiences I want to create for my family and also for me. I like to have fun a lot, and I love to like do awesome stuff, usually involving going fast with like the people that I love and care about. And,
Makes sense.
And I want freedom of my time. And for those things at the time, $30 million was the number, and that's what I started working towards.
Nice. Is that still the current North goal, even if the time horizon has changed?
No, it's much bigger now.
Nice. Cool.
And by the way, on that note, I'll say this: there was definitely like some discouragement that came with being 27 and realizing, man, I'm not hitting that goal. And I think Tony Robbins says that people overestimate what they can do in a year and massively underestimate what they can do in a decade. And having recently hit that decade mark from when I set those goals, it's pretty incredible when you stay focused on something for that long, like what can happen to like your capacity to bring those things into reality. Because when you really, really focus on something and you just do the things that are required over and over and over again for long enough, things can start to shift and change really, really quickly. Because in the reality is they're not shifting quickly. You just done a lot of work for an extended period of time, and all those results can start to kind of catapult you into the future that you wanted
100%.
In a much shorter period of time than you thought was possible.
100%.
But it's a culmination of literally at least for me, 12 years of work.
There's a couple sayings, right? Like if you do 0.1% better every day, it compounds. But over 365 days or 10 years, it's, I don't know, in the thousands of percentage. I don't know the exact number.
Yeah.
And like similarly with angles, if you go 1 degree in the right direction today, 10 years down the line, that's so much more in the right direction than 1 degree in the wrong direction, right? So there's a lot of ways to look at that. But people highly underestimate how making the right moves, even though there's no immediate gratification, but there's patience. You need patience. It's a marathon. Everything's a marathon. But everyone's just, I need it today. I need it now. I need the gratification today, which may harm you or may not get what you want. But
one of my,
I completely agree with what you're saying.
100%, man. I do. About a year and a half ago, I was kind of obsessed with maximizing my testosterone naturally, and I did a bunch of things that worked really well, and I was kind of stuck at like a certain threshold. I wanted to get even higher. And I heard that cold plunging helped with that. So I went and I bought a chest freeze, and I found a guide, and I retrofitted it, and I built a cold plunge in my garage. I started doing it every day, and it definitely increases your testosterone. I don't care what anyone says. I did blood work every 6 to 8 weeks for years, and my testosterone went up by 30 to 40% doing that. And it also almost tripled my free testosterone, which for anyone on here who's into that stuff, that's what actually matters. But the big thing is that going into 36-degree water for 2 minutes every morning for 14 months in a row, this is what I've done now, at least every day that I was home, I've done that. Even when it's this morning, it's in the 30s outside. It sucks a lot. And it doesn't really get easier. You don't shiver as much, but it still sucks every day. And one of my mantras to myself, after I'd done it for a long time, I started to get a little, the novelty wore off and it became more of a chore. One of the things I'd say to myself is, I move towards discomfort with speed and certainty, because on the other side of discomfort is everything that I want out of life.
100%.
And people don't realize it. It's not suffering. Discomfort is an illusion. It's a creation of the mind. They're not our thoughts. It's somebody else's thoughts that we picked up from the ether or infinite
100%.
intelligence. it's all an illusion. It gets like, if you know that like it's going to get you what you want, you need to do that, and you need to build that muscle, because the more that you do that, it's going to make everything else easier in life. And with a lot of like the hard decisions and hard things that I've had to do, what seemed to me hard now, I think that who I am in 10 years will probably look at the things 100%. I do now and look at them as easy. And the things that seemed hard this last year that I had to do to get the business to where it is today, it makes it a lot easier to do those things, because I start my day like jumping into 36-degree water and going into fight or flight, and it's just kind of like, yeah, of course I'm going to do it. I just do.
Do you know who Jesse Itzler is?
Yeah.
Have you read his book Living with a Seal?
Yeah.
So when you say there's a line in that book where one of the first runs he's taking, because like it's freezing cold outside, and David Goggins is like, I look outside and all I see is sunny and 65. And he's like, it's a notion of your mind. And what you see outside is what you want it to be.
That's right.
You think it's cold and freezing, but I see sun because I have to go on a 6-mile run. And for me, it's sunny. I don't care what the temperature is, but I see sunny, so I'm going to go enjoy this run. And I believe that it's all a state of mind. It's all what you believe it is versus an actual like pain versus hardship versus like what you're gonna feel, right? But that line where he says, I look outside and I see sunny and 65 is very much, you gotta train yourself to pick your battles and choose your battles and see, what am I gonna win? What am I gonna go fight over? What am I gonna go do? And how am I gonna go reach my target? Like you said, I have to go, and what's the line you used? Whatever's over the hardship, there's only winning on the other side, right?
On the other
100%.
Yeah, on the other side, discomfort is everything I want out of life.
But no, I 100% agree with what you're saying. Going back to your journey, kill the marketing agency, and you decide to shut it down, take a sales job. What happens after that?
Yeah, well, going back to the way that I made decisions, the way that I've made decisions for the last 12 years, I asked myself at that point, all right, well, like, what is going to get me closer to where I want to be? And I needed two things. I needed money and I needed skills. I had the opportunity to work at a really solid Austin-based enterprise tech company selling software, and I could have made much more money there than at the company where I ended up working at. The difference is that I was going to do more of what I'd already done. I'm sure I would have gotten better at selling enterprise software. There's certainly nuance to that. And the company that I was going to work at, I would have been surrounded by incredible people, like world-class people. And there are many of people whom I still am close friends with and would have really enjoyed working with. And at the other company, I was going to be the first oil and gas salesperson for this robotics company, selling robots that, at the time, they sold robots that climbed up the walls of the insides of power plants and did what's called non-destructive testing, where they basically pulse sound waves into steel to see how many thousandths of an inch was remaining on the inside of these steel tubes to prevent these power plants and refineries from going kaboom.
Yeah,
and that was, first off, very different and very interesting technology, very different than anything that I'd sold up until that point. So I knew that this was an opportunity to learn how to sell something different. One of the things that I learned from the consumer products business is that I learned so much about sales by having to sell something I didn't know anything about. It was a new vertical, new industry. I learned about new buyer personas. I learned about solving problems differently. But that's one of the things that I realized is that, most companies that get started, most like startups, you need a couple different personas. I think I've learned this from like running lean, which is kind of an offshoot of, I think, the Lean Startup. Maybe I've like read parts of Lean Startup. I read all of Running Lean. That book was amazing. And it talks about how you need three types of people to start a company. You need a hustler, you need a hacker, and a designer, which is basically code for you need a sales guy, a product guy, and an engineer. Yeah. The thing is, you really don't need a sales guy. You kind of do. What you really need is you need someone who's good at business development, which is I define as someone who can go in and understand a problem really well, understand the market for that product, and because in order to do that, you have to understand what is the financial value of solving that problem. So if you're going to save an oil refinery $1 million per tank per year at that refinery, then, and this is not exactly how this would work, but I'm just doing it as an example. And they have 100 tanks. Well, that's $100 million that you'd save that oil refinery per year. And if there's 132 oil refiners in the United States, then you take that number, and that's like how much, and take that number, like times 132, and then you multiply that, and that's how much money you're saving them. And a pretty good rule of thumb that I've found that I picked up from a product leader that I worked for at Gecko is that if whatever like money you're going to save the customer, you should very, very easily be able to take 10% of that.
100%.
So at Gecko, I learned how to do that. I got to run around and I figured out how to sell this robot, which we had never been sold to oil refiners before. And we closed while I was there for 3.5 years, and we grew it from just me to 7 salespeople and like 25 or 30 operators.
Nice.
They didn't all report to me. I'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
And when we closed our first deal with like Exxon, Chevron, rolled at Shell, BP, I think Citgo while was still there, Dow Chemical, closed all kinds of deals, and all these massive companies. It was insane. It was such an amazing experience. I traveled over 200 days a year for the next 3.5 years. Like 1 year I did 273 on the road.
Nice.
I got to go speak at a global robotics summit and rub shoulders with like BP executives, which at the time I thought was a really big deal.
Nice.
And it was like the best learning experience ever, because I got to learn how to do business development. I got to learn about margins. I had at the time it drove me crazy, and I couldn't be more grateful for it now. But the guy that I worked for, one of the founders, he's a finance guy, so he cared a lot about this thing that we don't talk about in software very much called margins.
Yeah.
So there was a lot more control on things like discounts. And I had to think about, okay, well, what's it going to cost to go do this job? Because we were selling robotic services, we were just selling robots. So we had P&Ls for every job, and if me or my sales reps didn't have a good P&L on the jobs, we wouldn't get paid. So we started thinking about that, and I got to hire people. So I got to learn way more than I would have at the other company. And then I did fine there. I didn't do poorly. It's just I didn't make
the same. Yeah.
If you're really good at selling SaaS in Austin, especially from like 2018 to 2022, I mean, like
you could have made a good chunk of change. Yeah.
Well, at the time, it would have seemed like it. And I wouldn't have learned all the things I did.
100%.
So,
yeah.
I mean, I got so I ended up doing that, and about a year and a half into it, I don't know if I would have been the VP of sales, and like I know that if I was going to keep working at that company, that was the path that I was going to be on. And I started to get a little distracted, and I had a conversation with a friend who was visiting from out of town, and she kind of challenged me on, hey, what are you doing? And I kind of talked a little bit about how much equity I had in the business and what I thought was possible if I became the VP of sales. And she was like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I really want to start this company. And, there's a lot of risk there, and I have all these things lined up, and things are going really well right now. She looked at me, she goes, well, I mean, if you want to argue for what's holding you back, then you can keep it. And at that point, I was like, okay, I guess I need to start planning my escape. Yeah. So I started, at that point, I think the next day or the next week, I started looking for a co-founder to do the next thing, which is where that came from.
Nice.
But it ended up taking me about 2.5 years from that point to actually quit and go full-time. So there was a lot of work that went into that.
So at this point, I'm assuming you've paid off all your credit card debt. You're now in a much better spot. You've learned from your co-founder mistake the first time around. What are you doing differently on the second time, and to make a better co-founder choice? How are you going about this the second time around?
Well, again, there's nuance to it, because I thought that I had it all figured out. So I'm like, I need to find an engineer. What I didn't realize at the time, because I hadn't read that Running Lean book, is that there's a difference between a product guy and an engineer.
100%.
You get it. You run your own agency.
Yeah, 100%.
And I found a world-class engineer. And I found a world-class engineer who had a different risk profile than me. Very entrepreneurial guy. And I take really big risks in my life. I always have, and I'm going to continue to, because it's kind of in my nature. And his risk appetite was a little different than mine. And honestly, I love that guy to death. We're still friends, and he's an absolute genius. He's an incredibly intelligent person, a great professional, and has a ton of integrity. And we ended up building like something together. We started working on the idea, and we ended up closing a couple of customers, very small customers, and I decided it was time to go full time, because I had the money saved up for a while, and it was starting to get I was getting that itch where I was like, this is ridiculous. I need to go keep taking action. I'm not learning. The only way that I'm really going to figure this out is if I go full time. And we ended up getting into some disagreements about how that arrangement was going to look like, and we ended up having a bit of a falling out, and we parted ways. So that was in January of 2022, so almost 2 years ago. And I ended up deciding that I was just going to go start over because we worked together up until that point.
Yeah.
Any IP that we created, any software we created, well, I didn't build it, so I don't understand how any of it worked. I'm a sales guy.
Yeah.
And yeah, and like he owned part of that, and he didn't want to just sell it to me or anything.
100%, yeah.
So because he understandably had emotions invested in that, so I decided to start over and figure out something new to build. So we had that conversation about a week and a half before I quit my, actually it was the day before I gave my 2 weeks notice. And, or it was a couple days before, but it was right before I was giving my 2 weeks notice, and I was already planning on doing that. We parted ways, and I gave my 2 weeks notice anyways, and I said, I understand the market pretty well. I understand a lot of the problems well, and I'm either going to, I'm gonna burn the boats to make myself take the island. And I just said I'll find a way or I'll make one, and I quit the job.
Nice. So for those listening who don't know, why don't you just give a quick intro on what the idea was? How did you enter the HR tech space, and what is the general problem you're trying to solve here?
Sure. So I had a difficult time getting my first job out of college, and I was pretty familiar with because that guy that mentored me, he turned me into a job getting machine. I got really good at it. So when I switched careers and went from finance into tech sales, it was really easy. It didn't take much work because I'd already been through it once. Yeah. And over the last decade or so, my side hustle / passion has been for free because I didn't charge anyone for it. It's been helping people get jobs. So I just helped a lot of people get into tech sales or work on their resume and coach them through interviews, do my best to give them advice on the right decisions to make. And about 4 years ago, I decided, one of the things that I realized from the last business that I started back in 2018 was that with the sales agency is that I wanted to solve a problem that I was really passionate about. What I'm passionate about is helping people.
100%.
And I also believe that you solve a big enough problem for enough people, you're going to make a lot more money because you're adding value to people.
100%.
That's what value is. It's solving problems for people. And if people aren't willing to pay for it, it's not very valuable. So I started to work on solving the pain associated with getting a job. And I narrowed into military veterans because like my dad served in the military for 20 years. I was pretty familiar with, I knew that people getting out of the military, all else being equal, especially the enlisted folks, had a really difficult time getting a job in the civilian world because a lot of their skills don't directly translate over. Even if they did, there's a lot of things that you just don't get taught while you're in the military. It's certainly not when you're transitioning out. Yeah. There's resources that go into doing it, and some of it's really great. There's a lot of really awesome people that work to help veterans as they're getting out, and a lot of the information isn't all that useful or relevant or accurate. I started helping military veterans out of Fort Hood, Killeen area get jobs in Austin, like for free. I was like, I don't know what the problems are, and if I get out there and help enough people, I'll just start to learn things and familiarize myself with it. So I did that for a year or two, and then started to learn about some of these programs from the government to help upskill and reskill veterans. And I started doing some consulting in that space after I went and started working on the job machine full time. So I started working on that, and then I stumbled onto one program in particular where there was an opportunity. I was focused on helping military veterans get jobs in tech. Learned a little bit about the market, and I ended up realizing that it was a huge problem. And because there's a huge problem, there's a lot of money to be made. And being the salesperson that I am, I sold a couple of customers software that didn't exist yet. I think they call that vaporware. Yeah. And then I ended up. This guy that I worked with, I didn't work with him, but he'd been introduced to me by one of the founders of the enterprise software company I'd worked at like 6 or 7 years before. He introduced me in like 2019 when I was looking to start a business again. I'd asked him, hey, who do you know in the area in Austin that's doing something cool? It's kind of early stage and is a big hustler and I want to be around the people that have really big goals and work really hard, because you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I really believe that proximity is power. 100%. So so he introduced me to him, this guy, Trey, which was my business partner. It was funny because I didn't notice at the time, but when we met, Trey thought I was trying to get something from him. He's the founder CEO of this company called Chronologic that was at one point valued at $70 million. He had raised $20 million over the years for it. So he was coming up. I think he'd raised like 10 at that point. And he thought I was trying to work for him or something. And then it's funny because if he were here, what he'd tell you is he'd be like, yeah, I thought Brandon was trying to sell me something. And after a while, I realized he was just this high energy sales guy. He just wanted to, be around people that were doing cool stuff. So we became really close friends. And then I started hosting this event in my place for friends every other Thursday. And I've done that for a couple of years now. And he started coming at one point after he exited his last business, the one that I told you about. He kept hearing about what I was doing because I'd always ask him questions because he's a product guy.
Nice.
So he thinks about things very differently than I do. And one day I came over to his place. My move to kind of get time with Trey is I'd call him up and I'd be like, hey, I learned something and I think there's a really good business here, but I don't know what to make of it. Can I bring the whiteboard over? He's like, yeah, bring the whiteboard. So I come over to his house. I bring a whiteboard, a couple cigars, and we drink some whiskey and smoke some cigars. And he just etch a sketch all over the whiteboard and put together something. I'd be like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. All right, well, I'll go sell this. And then I'd just pay him in cigars and conversation because he loved to kind of talk about that stuff. And after I closed those customers, I came back to him and I went, hey, man, I know what I want to build. I don't know if it's going to work, but I think it'll work. And I got a budget for it. I had savings at this point. So I was like, hey, do you know anyone who, in your network who could build this? And he kind of looks at it and he's kind of thinking to himself and he goes, well, I mean, if someone was going to do this, they'd probably have to do X, Y, Z, and they didn't need to know how to do A, B, C. And I'm kind of a free agent right now. I'd be willing to do it. I was like, really? You would? He goes, yeah. Well, how much would it cost? And he tells me, and I go, well, I mean, I'm a salesperson. I'm like, listen, man, I'm bootstrapping this. I'm on budget. Could you do it for this much? And he agreed, and he built it on schedule, and
Nice.
We had a lot of traction, right from the get-go. And
Nice.
we just kept having conversation with customer after customer after customer, and we get done with it, and he's like, all right, I want in. What do we got to do to make me a co-founder? And
Nice.
we got a deal done, and he came on, and then we built that thing. It didn't work at all. It's funny oftentimes how when you think you understand the problem,
100%.
but just to build something, which by the way, we built really quickly. We got it done in 3 months. We got an MVP out there.
Yeah.
We realized almost instantly that this thing wasn't doing the job. And then we got scrappy, so I was doing a lot of manual things to deliver on what the software was supposed to do. And then Trey, being the product guy that he was a product guy, not an engineer, he productized a lot of the things that I was doing, and we ended up launching what we now call the job machine. And yeah, we went from 0 to $550,000 ARR in 5 months with just 2 employees, and we're actually EBITDA positive in October and
Nice.
November. So
Nice.
but yeah, there was a lot of scarcity along the way. Definitely run out of the war chest and then some. So it was a pretty fascinating experience the last year or two.
Because we first met on the Saturday walks in Austin called the Boardwalks, right? And I think on that walk you mentioned you guys just went positive, and there's some notion of like you were happy about hey, we just went positive. It's been a journey, and that's what we started talking about on the walk. Throughout this journey, you went from idea, whiteboarding, validation, paying customers, MVP. What part of this process would you say was insightful and learning? Because you started out with one problem, you built a solution, and now you have something completely different.
Yes.
But that's very key to the process, right? And sort of what I'm trying to get at is founders and people early in their journey listening to this are very tied to the solution. But I want to hone down and say understanding the problem is very important. So why did you guys decide to do customer interviews? You had a problem, you had an MVP. Why not just keep building on that MVP? Why go and do more customer interviews? Was there something you were seeing? Did you still not know what you were building? why go deeper and like try to understand from the customer?
That's a great question. And a lot of our process for this, I got to learn from other people's mistakes. I worked for a couple of really great companies over the years, and those companies grew to the size they did because they did some things right. And at least a couple of them stopped growing at the size that they did because they stopped doing what worked early on. And the reason that they grew early on is because, at least in most instances, because they understood their customer's problem really well, and they solved that problem, and they delighted their customers, and people signed up in droves. And then what would happen very frequently is people at the company who usually weren't talking to customers at all, or even talking to salespeople who were talking to customers, would make assumptions about what the customers really wanted, and without validating if someone would actually exchange money for solving that problem, and they'd build it. And then customers would go, oh, okay, what do I do with this? And salespeople would be trained to talk about it a certain way, and they'd be like, okay, but like that's not really an issue for me. There was no emotion tied to it because they weren't solving a problem. And then companies would hire teams of 30 or 40 engineers to build these new product lines that no one would want to buy because 100%. No one, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Because it was never validated. So what startup founders don't realize is that their product is not their product. Their product is their business model. And I'm taking that from that Running Lean book. I'm sure that the Running Lean book got it from one of the books behind me, or like there's that's written in a bunch of places. And that's something really important to understand, is that your product is your business model. And your business model, it all comes down to what problem are you solving for, how many people have it, how much are they willing to pay for it, and then what's your revenue strategy there? Are you charging recurring? Are you charging per occurrence or outcome like we do? There's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, and there's pros and cons to all of it. And ultimately, if you can't sell whatever it is that you've built, it means one of two things. Either A, you don't know how to sell, you're not selling effectively, or B, your product sucks. And that product sucks is such a crude way of saying it. It's that you don't have product market fit.
100%.
And yeah, it's such a big deal because we understood that there was a problem. The thing is, we didn't understand how the market worked. We didn't understand what the way that employers in our space, because we have a machine that gets people jobs. We didn't understand the ways that employers wanted to interface with the world. We didn't understand their problems, and we weren't meeting their needs. We were working to meet the needs of just the candidates and not also the employers. So by understanding how we could get the candidates the result that they want, without creating an extra burden of work and calories expended for the employers, we are going to add value to them. So what I would say to founders when they're building a business is the most important thing that they can do is go talk to customers and ask them about the problems. Ask them, like, a great question that you could ask someone is when because you can ask these questions to anyone, for you starting a podcast. A question I might ask you is, hey Avi, it's really cool learning about the podcast that you're starting. When you're at home at dinner at night talking to your wife about the difficulties with starting a podcast, what are the things that you talk about? Or you're talking to a working professional. Yeah, man, when you're at happy hour with Jim, what are the things that you complain about? And those are usually the things that people will pay money to solve for.
Yeah.
And then you ask them, man, how much? And then asking them questions like, how much time do you think that costs you? Or how much money is that wasting you? So it's easier in things like in some businesses, because in consumer products or in in heavy industry where I was selling robot solar refiners, it was really easy to quantify things. And if something is costing somebody time or productivity, those things can be measured. And if the amounts are big enough that they can be quantified, and you put a number on it, it's a big number. Again, take that number, multiply it by 10%, and then figure out how many other people have that same problem. Because you could find, this is one of the things that Gecko taught me really well. I would go all over the world. I went all over the world a couple of times. I would go all over the United States for sure, into the middle of nowhere. I talked to these refineries or chemical plants, and I had to get really good at understanding that understanding whether the problem that someone was talking to me about was a problem that just they had because they had a certain type of like alloy of steel that had this issue or like this particular situation because they built a refinery poorly, and that they had this nuance that was going to be an issue for just them, or is it something that was systemic and it was going to be in every oil refiner, or at least the vast majority? So you can do the same thing with any problem. You want to figure out how big is the market, because if you're okay with just building a $3 or $4 million lifestyle business with 2 employees, which you can totally do, you may be okay with that. And if you're like me and you want to make a whole lot more money than that,
100%.
you better
You got to think bigger.
You got to think bigger. So you may want to go after like the whole U.S. talent market
100%.
because that's bigger, and it's going to be a hard problem to solve for. It'll probably take more time, and
100%.
it's all about what you're working towards.
100%. You mentioned 2 things. So one sidebar. Do you think you having a sales background has aided or helped with your trajectory as a founder, SaaS founder, startup founder? Because personally, I feel like one thing I lack is just sales overall. I understand sales, but I'm not a great salesperson. It's something I'm trying to learn, understand, get better at. But like you said, at the end of the day, if you can't sell your product, you could have the best product in the world. But if you can't get someone to use it and click on it or, get their hands on it, it doesn't matter, right?
Okay.
Do you think having a sales background has helped or just made your journey better and helped your product journey, building a SaaS company, a tech company?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, it has. I think that for some people, it could be a bit of a crutch. It can actually get in the way of them starting a company. And there's 2 questions, and I want to answer both. And the first is, did my sales background help me? And the second question is, there's a couple layers to it. I basically have 2 answers. You didn't ask 2 questions.
Yeah.
So in answer to your question, it definitely has helped in terms of going and getting customers. Getting customers for us is really easy. The thing is, though, and I'll tell you this, is that the reason getting customers is really easy is because we have an incredible product. Like, the offer for our product is such a no-brainer that anytime we need to get more customers, I'll sell for a week and I'll accidentally oversell us like more than we can afford to grow for the next like 3 to 4 months. So it's easy. I hardly sell at all in our business. The skill set that really has helped me the most was what I learned when I was working for that Gecko Robotics company, when I was going and I was learning about problems and figuring out, because I would have to go in there and I have to figure out, do they have a problem we can solve for? Can we solve with our existing robotics platform? If we need to make modifications, how much would those modifications cost for our engineering team to make? How difficult would they be? And then what's the size of that market? And I would get grilled by my boss about whether or not it was going to be a good move or not. Even when it was sometimes, man, it would take months sometimes for me to build the case, because my boss knew I was a good sales guy, and I'd get myself sold and I'd get him sold if he wasn't careful.
Yeah.
And I think he was wise for doing that. It definitely made me better. And, there were some projects that I wanted to do that we didn't do that I think maybe we should have. And there's also some that we did that ended up that we probably shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
So there's also some that we did that ended up making the company a ton of money, and more importantly, it's making me money now because I got to learn how to have those conversations with people. Because there's a nuance to it and there's a cadence to it. Because you can't just go in and close them on something that doesn't exist yet. You're learning about a problem. You're scoping the project.
100%.
I mean, and you do this very similarly with your agency when
100%.
you're building these things. So that was really, really helpful. Now, when it comes to closing deals, it's definitely helpful to know how to get a contract over the finish line, all like the sales and negotiation tactics, which I'm sure there's ways to learn it faster. I mean, you've probably read a lot of the same books that I have over the years, and I've done, I think, thousands of sales presentations. I made like 70 or 80,000 cold calls. So I'm definitely good at reaching people. The thing is, though, and this is where I was going with this, is that that doesn't scale. Or it does, but you have to hire salespeople. Salespeople are expensive. Full-time employees are expensive. One of the things that me and Trey see that we have been very careful to not replicate with our business, which is why we're EBITDA positive, is that full-time employees are really expensive, and most startups, they take problems that should be solved with engineering, and they button them up with people. That's something that software companies are infamous for doing.
Yeah.
Is they sell a software solution, and then they basically do what I've done numerous times, which is be the software that we haven't built yet, and they build whole companies around that. And that's not why all of them. It's why many venture-backed startups, they burn millions of dollars a year. It's not the only reason. It's one of the
Makes sense.
That's one of the primary reasons, I think. So companies that with really, really good products, we're firm believers that you should be able to build products in a way to where they market themselves. And the way you do that actually is, and we haven't done this yet, that's what we're working on this next year, is if you can add value, if you can add so much value to someone to where there's a huge raving fan and you don't ever have to talk to the customer. That's how good you want your product to be. You don't want to have a customer success team.
100%.
So you create something that's so good that they're a huge raving fan, and then you find some way to add value in the transaction between them and other similar, other potential customers, to where you're adding value to where you can basically get your customers to sell for you.
100%.
And you can call that a referral. There's other creative ways in different types of businesses and different markets where you can do that. If you can do that, you never have to have a sales team.
100%.
So I think that, and I know this because I worked for at least one of them, you can definitely you can make up for having a bad product for a while with a great sales team, and your business will eventually go under because you hit a certain point where your cost of acquiring a customer
becomes really high.
It becomes really high, and then because your business infrastructure it's your business infrastructure gets bigger, and you start losing all your customers because you churn. We have 100% customer retention rate with our business.
Nice.
So that's very unusual for certainly the companies that I've worked at. I think basically every company, and it comes down to having a really good product. The second thing that I'll say has to do with salespeople getting into starting companies. And I want to touch on this because one of the things that I've seen is that I have a lot of friends who are in sales, in tech sales, and they said they wanted to start a company and they never did. My business partner from 6-7 years ago was one of them. And what I've found is that salespeople get golden handcuffs because once you start making $200,000, $300,000, $500,000 a year, and you're in your mid to late 20s, it's pretty difficult to go from making $500,000 or even $200,000 a year, and then going and making no money, or the way it works is being a founder, losing money.
100%.
And one of the reasons that I was able to do that is because I had a BHAG, I had a big, hairy, audacious goal, and I was willing to do whatever it took and delay gratification for however long I needed to in order to get to where I wanted to be. So I think having a sales background is the single most important skill set that a founder could have. I think that everyone that wants to start a business should either go get a sales job, or they should at least start selling something. It'll change their lives forever. And they need to be very wary that they understand what they want, and they can have big enough leverage to stay the course long enough to actually see it through. Because I've seen a lot of really, really gifted people get caught up in the comfort and the certainty associated with making great W-2 income
100%.
and staying in there forever. Which, by the way, and I'll end your answer on this note. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's what somebody
100%.
wants, that is amazing. And if you want, and by the way, there's no guarantee of freedom of your time or with money starting a business for most people, and yet to be seen for me too. You can stay on that hamster wheel for a long time, and there's definitely the upside starting your own business is a lot higher than
100%.
working for somebody
100%.
else.
A couple quick questions to end this out. You mentioned product market fit. Do you think you found product market fit with Job Machine? And how do you define product market fit?
So we have within our SOM, TAM, SAM, SOM.
Yeah.
So TAM, SAM, and SOM, I think that they stand for total addressable market, strategic or
Serviceable addressable.
Serviceable addressable market, and then strategic operable market or something like that.
Attainable or same thing, yeah.
All they really mean is it's your TAM is the whole market that you could potentially get. Your SAM is what it's 2-3 steps ahead, and then your SOM is where you're making money right now.
100%.
We've got product market fit for our SOM.
Nice.
Like big product market fit. We have more customers lined up that want to sign up than we're willing to take on right now.
Nice.
So we've got product market fit for them. Yet to be determined for our SAM. We've got a couple customers in that space, and then for our TAM, we don't know yet.
Okay.
We've gotten great feedback from
But
potential customers on what we
to
have in
determine,
closed
yeah.
beta. This isn't the technical definition for product market fit.
Yeah.
I haven't really thought a whole lot on it. And if I had to define it like right now, at least for me, in terms of, like if
I want to, my personal take on it is it's fluid, and every founder I've talked to has their own version of it based on the use case, the scenario, and the definition.
Yeah, the way I define it for us right now, I'd say product market fit is when you can sell it to someone and it actually works.
Makes sense, 100%.
So like for our SOM, we've sold it to them and it works.
Makes sense.
And then for our
Easy enough.
Yeah, for our SAM, we've sold it to them. I don't know if it's going to work for them yet, but
Makes sense.
We'll see. And then can you sell it? Is it working?
Yeah.
Neither for the TAM.
Sweet. I like to end with a couple quick questions I'm asking all my guests. So what are 3 resources that you would recommend to early or just people in their journey right now? It can be books, resources, mentors, founders, communities, whatever you want. Just 3 resources you recommend to someone.
Yeah, the 3 resources that I'd recommend. I'd say 1, I think that in terms of getting leverage, kind of like what we talked about early on, I think that anyone who hasn't read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill should read it. I think it'll change most people's lives. The second resource I'd recommend is that Running Lean book. I think it's by Ash Moria. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing
We'll link everything, yeah. We'll
yeah,
link everything.
I really, really recommend that. That book is really, really powerful. It's very focused on getting traction as quickly as possible and basically not building a product, but using those mock-ups to take like a week or 2 and figure out if something's worth spending 3 months building, as opposed to doing the opposite, which is what most people do, which is they take 3 months building something and they get about the mock-up in a week. And then the third resource that I'd recommend is people should follow that Alex Hormozy guy on Instagram, and they should listen to his podcast. That guy is like 3 decades ahead of his age, and his podcasts are super short and to the point, and there's just so much value. Most people on here probably already listen to them, and if they don't, I learn a ton from that guy.
Have you read his books?
I've read the one. I read part of the other. I mean, his books are cool if you're looking to generate leads and stuff.
Yeah.
I like his other content better because it's more relevant to where
Makes
I'm at.
sense. Makes sense.
I don't have a sales problem to solve for.
I ask all my guests what's one question they have for the next guest. So the previous guest I had on, the question they had was, when something happened and you couldn't keep going, what did you think about that kept you going?
I think the toughest moment of running the business that we had was this last April, so like 8 months ago. I think I told you about this on the walk, when I went from having war chest and some money saved to spending all that, and then I got another $100,000 in either consumer or personal debt, and I put I had like a little over $1,000 to my name, and in order to hit payroll for my business partner, who has a wife and a mortgage and stuff, I put the last $1,000 I had into the business, and at one point I had $38.09 left.
You just mentioned this, yeah.
I just looked at I didn't really think about, I just didn't look at there as being another option. I just believed that I was going to find a way or make one. And I just asked myself, okay, well, what's the worst case scenario? If all else fails, what can I do? What if we run out of money, we don't get these next couple of checks from customers on time, and I can't hit payroll, what am I going to do? And I asked myself that question. I said, my first answer for my subconscious was probably something along the lines of, oh, well, then we're done, or there's no other way. And I always like to ask myself, well, and if there was a way, what would you do? I always ask people that when I'm talking to them. They're like, I just don't really know. I completely appreciate that. I know that it's a difficult question. And if you did know, what would you say? And my mind went to, I could still sell my house. I got equity in that. And my mind went, I really like my home, and I've got an amazing tenant who's a buddy of mine who has his own business that he's been building, and I like the community. It's I like hosting this thing that I do. It's well, how badly do you want? Well, more than anything. Well, I guess you're gonna sell the fucking house then. And I'm okay, cool, done. I just stopped thinking about it. I just kept doing it. That Alex Hormozy guy, he has something that he says in his podcast, and he's always like, when it gets hard, he tells himself, this is what hard feels like. You thought it was going to be easy? No. You thought it was going to be hard. Well, this is what hard feels like. And, and you do what's required. I ran like 300-mile races back when I was like doing like the robotics thing. Yeah. And I did that because I had a lot of health issues as a kid. I wasn't supposed to be able to like run like ever without medication. I did more than just like run a little bit. I did a bunch of running stuff to prove the doctors wrong. And the last race that I did, I broke my foot. I got some stress fractures about like mile 60. And I walked the last 40 miles in like the dark in the middle of winter to like give my subconscious the message that when things get hard, you keep going until you break or it breaks, but not a moment sooner.
Makes sense. And,
I finished that race limping and like I got it done. So I refuse to quit. Like you can kill me and I'll stop. And if that doesn't happen, I'm going to keep going until I succeed. And if this business failed, which I don't think it's going to, and if it did, I would take everything that I learned and I would start working on the next thing.
What's one question you have for the next guest? Whoever it is.
How big do you want to succeed and why?
Is there anything you want to leave the listeners with? Anything you want to have them? Where can they find you? What are you working on? Any piece of advice, whatever you want.
Yeah. What I would tell the listeners, and I like to tell people this, one of the most encouraging moments of my life was, one of the really crucial moments is when I was sitting there having that conversation with that mentor I mentioned about. He looked at me and he said, I believe you could do that. I think you totally could. And I had this guy that I met this last week, and he was telling me, this guy's in his like early 20s, and he was like, asked what his goals were. I could tell this guy just had really big goals. He just seemed like the kind of person that was very intense and also seemed pretty competent, but definitely had big goals. So I asked him, what are your goals for next year, man? And he looked at me and he went, oh, my goal was to make $1 million next year. And I could tell he was also having like a rough time because I asked him like, well, what's going on? You seem like you're kind of down a little bit. Like your energy's a little off. He goes, yeah, well, I'm not making as much progress towards the goal as I thought I would. I'm like, oh, you're 24 and you're not going to make $1 million next year. And I looked at him and I said, well, first off, man, I love the fact that like you have goals like that. You must have been like, raised well or by around people who, gave you permission to have goals like that. And I looked at him and I went, well, first off, I totally believe you can make it happen. Like I believe that you can do that. I think that like, most people are, this is a Tony Robbins quote, most people think they're lacking in resources when really they're just lacking in resourcefulness.
100%.
So my message to the listeners out there is that don't listen to anyone who tells you that your goals are too big or too crazy. Anyone who tells you otherwise, they're projecting their own beliefs that they have about themselves onto you. If you believe it, you can't achieve it. You just have to work hard enough and work long enough at it. And you have to be flexible in your approach, and you have to be intelligent enough to be aware of the results that you're getting. Figure out what's working, figure out what isn't, iterate and repeat. And if you do that for long enough, people, you can accomplish anything, and people underestimate or overestimate rather what they can do in a year, and they underestimate what they can do in a decade. So stay at it.
100%. Where can people reach out if they want to reach out to you? What's the best avenue?
I'm on LinkedIn.
We'll link everything in the description.
Cool. I'm a Weapons Grade Human on Instagram, and those are the best ways to reach me.
Sweet. Thank you. Well, thank you for coming on, Brandon. It's a pleasure chatting, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you, Abby. I appreciate you having me.